And we're back! Thank you for sticking with us and for coming back to finish the tale of the beleaguered Batavia and her very unfortunate passengers and crew. And I really do mean unfortunate. As we touched on last week, these brave souls had signed up, many unwillingly, for nearly a year at sea in absolutely dreadful circumstances.
No fresh food, water shortages, not even a pot to piss in. Just a hole in the ship.
But in the end, life aboard the Batavia was far better than life after it sank.
We want to warn listeners now that this episode is very dark. The events described are entirely true and entirely awful. We strongly urge caution for young audiences or even those of you with weak stomachs.
Additionally, if you haven't listened to the first episode on the Batavia, please do so now, or this second one will be very confusing. Now, to refresh your memories and orient us all, here is a short recap.
The Batavia is on its 211th day at sea when all at once the massive ship strikes an unseen reef at full speed. Brand new and filled with treasures bound for the Indies, her crew and passengers must evacuate or perish.
Over 2 days, using the 2 small boats they had left, the skipper and his men managed to save as much and as many as they can. At the end of the 2 days, the survivors are split into 3 groups.
180 men, women, and children are safely removed to an island they morosely call Batavia's Graveyard. 70 men are still left stranded on the wreckage, including the vile Geronimus Cornelis, and the Captain Jacobs, the upper merchant Pelsert, and about 50 sailors are isolated on a small islet. And these lucky men are in control of both boats, all the charts and navigation instruments, and most of the food and water. Again, the distribution seems a little unfair.
The captain is said to have been brave and struggled to save as many as he could. The upper merchant is said to have been practical and saved as much bullion, or money, as he could. But after exploring the few small islands in the vicinity and finding no obvious fresh water, they both concluded that for anyone to survive, the larger longboat must go to Java and come back with help. They needed seasoned sailors to attempt the 2,000-mile journey across open ocean with extremely limited resources.
I'm not gonna lie, that seems doomed for failure.
We shall see. Despite a few misgivings on Pelsert's part, the captain insisted that men would be men and save themselves rather than help others. He believed if they even attempted to give some of their water and food to the stranded men, women, and children left, they might kill them for more. So the men decided to abandon the 180 people on the island, as well as the 70 men still struggling among the debris.
That seems like a very self-serving belief.
Perhaps, yeah. The feuding leaders pulled their resources to retrofit the larger longboat to accommodate their skeleton crew and a few choice passengers, including 2 women, one of whom was the skipper's mistress and Lucrezia's maid, and one of them even had a babe in arms. And with that, they set off on a Hail Mary attempt to reach Java and save themselves. And only then would they send ships back to the wreckage in search of survivors and, perhaps more importantly to them, the rescued riches of the Batavia.
Hail Mary indeed.
We will now leave them on this perilous journey north and turn our attention to the leftovers, those who did not warrant a spot on the lifeboat.
I get that they're marooned and scared, but I might prefer the safety of land to a lifeboat overcrowded with people and undersupplied with food and water for 2,000 miles.
Both situations were bleak at best, yeah.
Yeah.
The 180 men, women, and children occupying the island known as the quote-unquote graveyard were in dire circumstances as well. Within the first 24 hours, they had consumed almost all of the fresh water. From there, hunger pains and thirst began to set in. While their stomachs growled and howled with pain, their saliva thickened to a paste. Their lips cracked, Their tongues hardened and swelled. Their eyes wept with blood. Even breathing became painful against their dry throats. Just 2 days in, 10 were dead, and the rest barely clung to life. They drank urine. Some even drank seawater. They chewed on lead pellets, hoping to induce saliva. Eventually, they drank the blood of birds and sea lions. Anything to help them find a moment of relief.
Yeah, I'd like to revise my previous statement. That sounds way worse than the lifeboat.
Rock versus a hard place, to be sure. It is in these moments of life and death that we see the measure of a man, or in this case, a woman. At a time when only 1 in 7 people could swim, a brave young servant girl volunteered to swim more than a mile from the island to the shipwreck in hopes of finding more supplies. Swimming this distance is hard for the average person today. Doing so after days without food or water is nearly suicidal. But this young woman prevailed. She was able to swim there and back despite the rough seas and bring with her a few essential provisions.
Honestly, I would imagine it was more morale boosting than anything else. A light at the end of their death tunnel.
Thankfully, after 4 days of dry, it rained. The people of the island were able to catch the fresh water and replenish their meager supplies. They decided to form a council, traditional of VOC leadership. The highest-ranking officer on the island, the surgeon, led the other 4, and they attempted to devise a system of distribution.
A surgeon? Really?
Oh, in name only. Mostly he was a barber that had a box of medicines that were generally useless, but helped morale.
Makes sense.
While the men, women, and children of the graveyard fought to survive, the 70 or so men still living on the wreckage were doing just fine. They had plenty to eat and drink, like naughty teenagers whose parents were away for the weekend. They got drunk, moved into the private officers' quarters, looted the jewels, even throwing them overboard in great decadent fistfuls, knowing gold couldn't help them now. For 8 days, they lived the high life.
Seems short-sighted.
Incredibly so. It was a ticking time bomb. The ship was slowly breaking apart, and the party on deck wasn't helping things. After 8 days, she was gone. Most on board couldn't swim, and so on that final day, most of the 70 revelers drowned. Only 20 managed to save themselves, clinging to planks of wood and just being lucky enough to float to shore. And now, cue the evil organ music. Unable to swim and unwilling to die, Geronimus Cornelis crafted a raft out of the ruins and drifted for more than 2 days, clinging for life until his raft disintegrated, at which point he found a mass of driftwood, which slowly brought him to the island. 10 days after the wreck, 2 of which he had spent alone, floating on debris, he finally made it to the island. The other survivors ran to help him. They rushed to his aid, treated him kindly, and praised God for saving him. He was the very last man to escape Batavia alive. This is where I have to put in a plea to Hollywood. Please make this into a movie. The drama is real. All you need are the hunky actors with their shirts torn and their abs exposed. I mean, this practically sells itself. Okay. Moving on.
I am happy to help with the casting. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it.
The Batavia was no more, but its final destruction greatly increased the survivors' supplies. Over the next few days, 500 gallons of water and 550 gallons of wine slowly washed ashore.
At least they'll be able to drown their sorrows.
A godsend, absolutely. But not nearly enough to support the 208 people now living on the island. Even with half rations, they wouldn't last more than a few days. Someone needed to take charge, to make a plan, to find a solution. And all eyes turned toward the now highest-ranking officer left, Under Merchant Geronimus Cornelis.
That is some bad luck there.
Yes, it is. He was quickly elected to the council, and his education, articulate manner, and silver tongue elevated him above the others. First things first, he needed a large tent all to himself, obviously. He also requisitioned the upper merchant Pelsert's left-behind clothing for himself.
One must always dress for the job they want, not for the job they have.
He certainly dressed the part. And only then did he go about the business of keeping everyone else safe. According to the VIP minister that was on board the Predicant, quote, the merchant in the beginning behaved himself very well, but quickly the facade began to fade. He soon tired of all the hard work it took to keep all these people alive. Ugh, 208 people means 208 mouths to feed. And then the rumors began. Some of the marooned began to talk about that whole planned mutiny thing.
Maybe they felt like it was not important to keep it a secret anymore.
Maybe, but Geronimus was worried. He wasn't yet named, but if he was, he'd definitely lose his high status and respect on the island. No more private tent, no more fancy uniform. And worse, should he survive this ordeal, it would mean a death sentence upon his return. A mutiny was a no-go, an absolute no-go. Nope. It just wouldn't do. His goal, which as the elected leader of the island soon became everyone's goal, even if they didn't quite know it, he must stay alive until rescued, no matter what.
Obviously, because that is what a psychotic brain wants, and therefore it's what God wants.
The council was a burden to him. They kept insisting on ridiculous things like rationing, which meant that no one was full, but no one starved. This would not do. He had to be rid of them, so he enacted the mutiny he'd already planned. Gathering about 24 followers, most of whom were experienced fighters, he billeted them together in tents, separate from the rest of the group. He then demanded, as the VOC's representative, full control of the weapons and the food stores. So now he had men and weapons, but he was still outnumbered. But villain that he was, he devised yet another evil plot.
You want to talk about motivated?
He sent his cronies out to look for water and food sources on the other islands close by. But though they found none, he told everyone they'd had great success. And then he began moving small groups of people to various islands, promising fresh supplies and better opportunities of survival.
So he's just moving people to uninhabitable islands to cull the population. It's cold, but it's smart.
Oh, just wait. One group of 40 men, women, and children were taken to a desolate island and left with promises of fresh supplies to come. A party of 15 was placed on another, smaller island, and they were left tools and asked to make rafts while they waited for the reinforcements. 20 VOC soldiers, a serious threat to Geronimus given their military strength and experience, were sent to a large island and told that there was fresh water, which was a lie. Left there with no weapons or equipment, they were enlisted to stockpile this water and promised a boat would return for them and the water in a few days. Finally, 4 dozen able-bodied men and boys were lured to a 4th island. Promises were given, lies were told, yada, yada, yada. I mean, you get the picture.
And all these people willingly went.
Seemingly so. Now, the population of the Graveyard Island was down to 90. And this is when the killings began.
Sorry, he was not already killing people?
Well, in a way, but things are about to get much more violent. Overly confident, Geronimus believed all the people he'd shuffled off to the other islands were dead and no longer a threat to him. He also believed that his will was God's will, and obviously God didn't want him to die. Therefore, any person standing in his way deserved to die.
Yeah, that makes sense.
First on the chopping block, the council. The other 4 members were dragging him down, making decisions that didn't always put him first. So he took advantage of a minor supply theft, insisting that the thieves be put to death. The council hesitated. They really didn't want more bloodshed. So he fired them and installed his mutinous cronies in their place. And then immediately ordered the executions of the thieves and further, based solely on rumors, executed 2 more men who were accused of attempting to make their own raft. Heaven forbid.
Yeah, making their own raft. That is definitely cause for the death penalty.
And that is how the killings began. But quickly, things escalated.
Oh, God.
Drunk with power and continually worried about supplies, Geronimus struck again. He announced to his flock that he was sending more men in search of water. He cautioned that they would be gone for quite some time, but it was for the greater good. And he did send them. He did. He sent them, along with a few of his more vicious cohorts, just out of sight, whereupon they were drowned. After this ruse worked the first time, Geronimus decided to repeat it many more times.
That's pretty shameless.
Things were going along swimmingly until the group of 20 company soldiers who were sent to find water on that large island actually found it.
Whoops. Bet he wasn't expecting that one.
No, he wasn't. They signaled with fires, which were visible not only to the graveyard island, but to all of the other islands he'd sent people to. And this would not do. Water on the large island would mean everyone would expect to move to the large island and, survive.
Can't have that, obviously.
Problematically, the party of 15 from the smaller island, who had been instructed to build rafts, set sail on one of their built rafts. Salvation, they thought, and they were off, going to the larger island.
Uh-oh, this is not going to end well.
This meant Geronimus had to act fast. He decided to attack. 7 of his men set out to intercept the raft and its passengers, which consisted of 2 families. Please be prepared, because what happens next is horrific. 3 of the passengers jumped into the water attempting to flee and drowned. The children on board were instantly slain. The men fought, and they fought hard. But unarmed and unexpecting, they didn't stand a chance. All the men died in various brutal ways. And I do mean brutal. That left just 3 women, who were dragged onto the mutineers' boat, rowed out to deeper water, and pushed overboard to be weighed down by their own skirts until they drowned.
How could one man inspire such terrible violence? Why did they even listen to him?
I wish I knew. I don't understand. This barbarous massacre happened in full view of the 130 survivors still alive. Drawn at first by the smoke signals, and then by the screams, not a man, woman, or child on any of the surrounding islands missed the bloodshed. Now they knew what Geronimus was capable of. And worse, they realized he had control of the weapons, the boats, and the supplies. At this point, many flocked to Geronimus' side, mostly joining him to save their own skins. But sly fox that he was, he never trusted these new recruits and often required deadly demonstrations of loyalty.
I shudder to think what that entails.
And this is the darkest part of our tale, so be prepared. Hans Hardens, a German soldier who was on board with his wife and 6-year-old daughter, was the first to be tested. While he and his wife were invited, i.e. required, to dine with Geronimus, their daughter was strangled to death. The wife was threatened next, but saved only when Hans vowed to be, quote, faithful in everything to Geronimus. It was a senseless and vile murder, and it affected the entire island. From then on, no one felt safe, ever.
I don't think I would either.
Andries de Vries was the next to prove his loyalty. He was ordered to kill the 11 people in the sick tent. Useless mouths, observed Cornelis. Andries did so, but then had to return the following day to slaughter another 5 who fell ill overnight.
Oh my god.
Now they all knew getting sick meant getting murdered. Erica, could you please read the following quote from a survivor?
So we all of us together expected to be murdered at any moment, and we besought God continuously for merciful relief. Oh, cruelty! Oh, atrocity of atrocities! They proved themselves nothing more than highwaymen. They've taken both goods and blood. I mean, that is absolutely chilling.
The killings just continued. Standing out in any way could spell your death. The murderers came at night, using axes and hatchets. With every kill, Geronimus's men became even more bloodthirsty. His men also enjoyed better rations, better clothes, better tents. These ruffians, men who had never had respect back home, existing on the very bottom rungs of society, now felt themselves to be the lords and the lawmakers, no longer lawbreakers. It was an enticing option for many. But the murders on the graveyard were only little entertainments. There were bigger plans afoot.
Bigger than murdering the young and infirm?
Geronimus may have forgotten about the 40 men, women, and children he sent off to a desolate island, but they had not forgotten him. Even before they saw the murders from afar, they suspected foul play, as they never received those supplies or any news from Geronimus's camp. Out of self-preservation, they all began to build rafts. Once this became clear to Geronimus, he gave explicit instructions to 7 of his most trusted men. Quote, "Kill most of the people, children as well as some men, and leave alive for the time being only the women who are there." 10 were killed outright, 6 more were badly injured and then later drowned, 4 pregnant women were found and spared, and 8 men managed to reach their rafts and escape. And the rest hid all day and all night until the mutineers gave up and left.
What a monster. I'm ready for Geronimus to drop dead.
And just 3 days after this first attack, Geronimus sent them to finish the job, ordering another young convert to prove his loyalty by cutting the pregnant women's throats, while the rest of his motley crew rounded up 15 boys and men from their hiding places, bludgeoning them to death. In the end, 3 cabin boys escaped this second attack via raft, only to be overtaken by Geronimus's men on their way back to the graveyard island. Captured, one of the boys was given a choice: his life in exchange for killing the other 2. So the boy turned murderer was spared.
Why did Geronimus spare him? Why did he continue to recruit rather than kill? Logically, it doesn't really help his problem of survival, and more followers still means more mouths to feed.
Some psychologists and historians have speculated that he took pleasure in exploiting weakness and corrupting youth. He forced men to slaughter their friends, and he turned young boys into men in the most hideous of ways.
I'm sure that there is a significant amount of power in the corruption of innocence. We can see it through a lot of history, and I'm sure that he felt wronged by whatever happened to him, and in turn, he wanted to make more killers to form some sort of retribution.
Actually, it is interesting to note that up until now, he hadn't outright killed anyone. He had only directed the killings. Not to say that he was innocent, but...
Neither did Charles Manson, but here we are.
I'm sure psychologists would have an absolute field day with diagnosing this maniac, but at some point it seems he decided to act. Perhaps he finally felt the urge to kill himself, or maybe his men started to question his resolve. But for whatever reason, he at least tried.
Tried, Caroline. It seems like they have ample murder weapons on this desert island.
There was a crying baby on the island. It had interrupted his sleep for many nights, and he decided, in truly the most cowardly act ever, to take the infant's life.
Yeah. Big dick energy right there.
Yes, that'll show my men who's boss. I'll kill the baby.
Absolutely steaming. What an absolute... I am just freaking coward.
Yeah, I'm pretty hot under the collar about this one. Appropriately, the former apothecary chose poison as his weapon. Pretending to offer the mother a sleeping balm, he administered mercurium sublimatum. But this horrible man, couldn't even poison a child. Instead, it fell into a coma. And still unable to physically dirty his own hands, he decided to blood another new recruit and made them finish the job by hanging.
Truly the most abhorrent thing I've heard in a really long time. If you're going to be this terrible, at least have the balls enough to do it yourself. And not even do it yourself, but maybe, be capable and proficient enough in your trade to do it correctly the first time. It's incompetence and ineptitude.
It was his first, and honestly, thankfully, last attempt at killing himself. But the baby was, in effect, the 105th person to die on his orders. Geronimus had established a sort of pattern to ease his own boredom and to sate his men's bloodlust. Every 2 to 3 days, a new victim was announced. Often, after the initial planned murder was finished, the men were still thirsty for more. Frequently, one victim turned into 2 or even 15, until there remained only one big target left, the predikant, or minister, along with his wife, 7 children, and that brave maid who swam to the sinking ship and back. Up until this point, the VIP passenger had remained incredibly lucky. All of his family had survived the wreck, the starvation time, the unimaginable thirst, and the murderous mutineers. But all good things must come to an end. While the eldest daughter, Judic, married, read, forced to sleep with, one of the brutalist mutineers, likely out of self-preservation, the other 6 children, wife and maid, all shared the minister's family tent. Unwilling to murder a minister, despite his own heretical beliefs, Geronimus happily abandoned the rest of the family to his band of butchers. While the minister and his eldest daughter were away, the by now professional killers dug a mass grave and brought hatchets, which they deemed better for close quarters killing.
Hatchets for women and children. I'm horrified how easily this one delusional man corrupted so many others. Are we to assume the Batavia just happened to be filled with psychopaths? I mean, this is a case for making a murderer if ever there was.
After they brutally hacked and mutilated the entire family, they sat down and ate the family's meal, unbothered by the bodies that littered the tent.
Lord of the Flies, not opium.
I'm afraid it continues.
Great. Fantastic.
These men, lust and power still coursing through their veins, went off and killed 2 more, including the bereaved mother of the previously poisoned, then murdered infant. Finally, they attempted to kill a 3rd bystander.
Aren't we running out of people?
But by this time, all organization was lost, and the 3rd man managed to escape. He took a handmade raft that he found along the beach, dragged it into the water, and soundlessly made his way to the larger island, the one that had found water, the one occupied by 20 fighting men, the one not controlled by Geronimus Cornelis. ... The larger island was far better resourced than Geronimus knew. It was, in fact, much more habitable than the mutineers' island. There was plenty of water, no rationing required, good fishing grounds, plenty of nesting birds to eat, as well as a previously unknown creature to the men. The men called them cats, but in fact they were actually wallabies.
Oh, that's cute.
And very tasty, so they say.
That took a turn quickly.
This expedition was led by a man named Wiebe Hayes.
What a name.
After signaling they'd found water and then receiving no reply but the screams of their murdered colleagues and fellow passengers, Wiebe knew something was amiss. Eventually, escapees from the other groups made their way to the larger island. In total, 8 men escaped the initial massacre of the 2 families on the raft, and another 20 successfully fled the graveyard island throughout the time. And with them, they all brought the horrifying reality. Quickly, Wiebe and his men realized that unarmed, they were sitting ducks. It was time for action.
It is about time for that, especially if Geronimus finds out they have food and water.
Especially, yeah. The 46 men and 1 boy on the island set about making weapons, fashioning pikes from ship planks tipped with 16-inch long nails. They improvised morning stars from leftover metal and wood. They gathered large lumps of coal to hurl at would-be attackers. Wiebe, a battle-hardened professional, scouted the island for the best defensive positions and posted lookouts. Wiebe also proved himself to be an inspirational leader, keeping morale high with plenty of food and water, as well as a common goal: stay alive, keep Geronimus out.
In the movie version, I see him as like Chris Pine, greatness forced upon him, muscles bulging under the pressure, long glances towards the fateful horizon, very much the Outlaw King.
In the end, both islands possessed roughly the same number of able-bodied men.
Oh, looks like they should have kept some of those poor innocent people alive.
Yeah, whoops! He had a chance and then he just killed them all. Oh, God. At this point, both islands anxiously awaited rescue. Based on estimations and very crude calculations.
I believe that's swag. Scientific wild-ass guess. Caroline, come on, get with the day.
Yes, perfect. Based on a swag, it was believed that somewhere around the 2-month mark, help would come. If help was going to come. And that time was drawing near. Geronimus knew Weba and his men would tell of his evil deeds to the rescuers, while the men of the larger island feared for the safety of the rescue crew. They assumed, correctly, that Geronimus planned to murder the rescuers, take their ship as his own, turn pirate with his motley mutineers, and leave everyone else for dead. The two islands were at an impasse. By August, Geronimus now openly espoused his heretical beliefs, attempting to remove his men from the influence of other theologies, especially the Dutch Reformed Church. To quote a survivor, "Daily we heard that there was neither devil nor hell, and that these were only fables." Geronimus preached, quote, that all he did, whether it was good or bad, as judged by others, God gave the same into his heart, unquote. He talked of libertine beliefs, including the idea that nothing is sin except what is thought of as sin. He instructed his men to throw away the rules, throw away the laws. He encouraged them to swear, told them to blaspheme, and forbid prayers or religious services. But Geronimus was worried. He now was in charge of a band of bloodthirsty, unregulated, unsatisfied men who could easily turn on him. After all, he was a bit of a coward. They had all murdered, and he had not, at least not successfully. So he decided to force his men to sign an oath of trust, proclaiming loyalty to each other and obedience to him in every way. 36 people signed, almost every man left on the island. Based on later testimonies, there was little choice, sign or die. He then retitled himself to Captain General of the islands and even, and this is so amazing, what a douche, he even altered the already stolen commander uniform to befit his new self-given rank. He, quote, changed daily into different clothes, silk stockings, garters with gold lace, and to all his followers, who were most willing to murder, he gave clothes made from red fabric, sewn with trim.
And they say that only girls like to dress up.
The killings continued. They had to satisfy this unruly horde. Geronimus ordered murders to settle scores, to punish dissent, and even just to entertain. There were 7 women who survived the wreck, the drownings, and the murders. 5 were considered, quote, common service women, and were available for the pleasure of all the men left on the island. But 2 were off limits. Judic, the daughter of the predicant minister, and wife of a high-ranking mutineer, and Lucrezia, the high-born, beautiful woman whom the captain and Geronimus had hoped would spark their initial mutiny. She was claimed by Geronimus for his own personal use.
Ugh, can you see the steam coming out of my ears?
Actually, hold on. I do think you'll find this next bit quite funny. He desperately wanted her, but kind of pathetically, he wanted her to want him.
Oh, because there's nothing sexier than an unhinged mass murderer. Am I right?
Mm-hmm. For 2 weeks, he tried to seduce her. He wrote sonnets, poured her wine, treated her with respect, and whispered sweet nothings. But damn, this brave woman refused. She said no time and time again.
I bet that really helped his, ego.
She held out as long as she could, until, that is, one of his cronies threatened to bash in her head with an axe. And that was the final straw. So she protected herself the only way she could. by making sure Geronimus stayed happy.
Ugh, I don't even have words.
Now that he had subdued Lucrezia, Geronimus turned his gaze to the island in the north. He was well aware that Weba and his men were alive and a threat, and he believed the rescuers were drawing near. It was now time to act. First, he tried diplomacy, writing a letter that he hoped would split the ragtag bunch of men and create a little civil war. He also, almost ludicrously, asked them to please return the boat that they had. Obviously, they didn't fall for it. Instead, they took the messenger hostage, who was, remember, a dangerous mutineer, so let's not feel too bad for him. Next came a boat of 20 mutineers ordered to finish off Weba's men once and for all. But that failed too. Literally, they ran home as fast as they could. I guess all of Weba's preparations were actually paying off.
Yeah, again, Chris Pine hauling lumber, shirtless to the beach, his face stern, eyes upward towards the horizon. A man, a few words. I'm telling you, Hollywood.
For his third at-bat, he sent the same 20 mutineers back again 1 week later, and same result. Ran home with their tail between their legs. Now, what is the definition of insanity again?
Doing the same thing over and over, and yet expecting different results.
Yes, precisely. After a short time, Geronimus was back at it. He offered a false peace, hoping to, as he says, quote, come to an accord with them in order, under the cloak of friendship, to surprise them by treason at an opportune time. Crafty little bugger. This time, Geronimus personally came and met with Hayes. This man, fatally overconfident, believed that A, God willed him to do this, B, he was invincible, and C, his silver tongue could convince Hayes of his sincerity. The two men spoke briefly, with Geronimus weaving a web of lies that I can only imagine were laughably obvious. But the would-be spider was already a fly in Weba's web. The parley was a trap, and Geronimus and his men had walked straight into it. Quickly, Weba's men overcame Geronimus's bodyguard of 4 mutineers, and in full view of the remaining mutineers, Geronimus was taken prisoner, bound and gagged, and watched as the 4 bodyguards were killed.
Oh, how the tides have turned!
Geronimus now found himself living in a limestone pit. And to make him useful, Weba gave him a job. Bird plucker.
You know, that sounds really perfect for him.
Oh, I think it was, yeah. The rebel men threw slaughtered birds into the pit for him to pluck. He was required to return 8 of every 9 birds back to the men, ready for roasting. The 9th bird was his to keep and eat, raw. There he lived, splattered with guts and feathers, living and eating in his own excrement.
I think I speak for all of us when we say, oh, that poor bird.
The remaining mutineers retrenched and appointed Wouterloos. Oh, I know. Fabulous. Wouterloos was appointed as their new commander. Despite losing 4 of their very best men, not to mention their religious and military leader,
cult leader,
the less than 20 men left were determined to overcome Weba's ragtag band of rebels. They actually had no choice. While severely outnumbered, they did have 2 muskets, and they used them well. Turns out Geronimus, apothecary/heretic/undermerchant/captain general of the islands, didn't actually know a whole lot about warfare and didn't make very intelligent decisions.
You don't say.
I know. Picking Weba's men off one by one from afar, Wouterloos mutineers were beginning to believe they might just win. When, all of a sudden, a ship sailed into view.
Oh my god!
Seeing the billowing sails against the horizon, muskets were dropped and spikes abandoned. All the men knew their fates were about to be sealed.
Again, Hollywood, you can't write this stuff. Make the movie, or even a Netflix series.
Can't you picture it? Pelsaert, the upper merchant, returning to the wreckage, posed like Washington crossing the Delaware, the telescope in one hand, while the other grips the rope and his lean body falls into the wind, desperate for signs of life.
Clearly, Caroline has the vision. Feel free to call us for casting tips.
We would be happy to cast this for you. Just a small fee. It's no big deal. And so we are back to where we started 2 episodes ago. Weba and his men are desperate to be saved, not only from their marooned hell, but also from this bloody battle and crazed lunacy. But Wooderloos and the mutineers cannot allow Weba to tell tale of their treachery. That would mean death sentences for all. Instead, Luz makes a hasty decision. The mutineers must now attack the rescue ship, murder all on board, and turn pirate.
Yep.
I will leave our murderous mutineers and ragtag rebels to row it out on the water. While they're racing toward the rescue vessel, I'm going to give you a very abbreviated account of Captain Jacobs, upper merchant Pelsaert, and their own struggle to return to Java. Oh yeah, those guys! You almost forgot, didn't you?
Yeah, I can't even deny it. I just figured they died.
48 men, women, and even one baby overcrowded the longboat. Only 30 feet long, it had just one mast and needed 10 oarsmen. Lucky for them, Captain Jacobs was an excellent seaman and skilled navigator.
Apparently.
They were miserable, yes, but they survived. They found water to refill their barrels, they navigated 2,000 miles of open ocean.
That's a lot.
And they fished to sustain themselves. Hunger turned to starvation, thirst verged on madness. But 23 days after the Batavia hit the reef, the little longboat sighted the Javan coastline. Just 2 pints of water were left on board. Miraculously, all 48 survived, even the baby.
That's incredible.
It really is. It's unbelievable. And while we at home are absolutely cheering for those brave souls, yay! Yay! You survived! Now go enjoy a long hot bath and a delicious meal!
But really the bath.
The VOC, the most powerful company in the world, was not so thrilled. The Batavia and its cargo represented 400,000 guilders.
Which is?
About $30 million today.
That is a pretty penny, I would say.
The Governor General of the VOC in the Indies was none too pleased. However, Pelsaert convinced the Governor General to send a small yacht back to the wreckage with provisions, waters, cables, and anchors in hopes of a rescue. Not necessarily a rescue of the people so much as a rescue of the gold.
Ooh.
The orders actually read, quote, "So the company may receive some recompense to balance its great loss."
Wow, touching. I mean, the sentiment there is palpable.
Very. Okay, back to the action. It was the rebels who reached the rescue yacht first. Pelsaert recalls, quote, "A man named Weba Hayes sprang aboard and ran toward me, calling from afar, 'Welcome, but go back immediately, for there is a party of scoundrels on the islands near the wreck with 2 sloops who have the intention to seize this yacht.'"
Thank God you're here now, leave!
Exactly. Pelsaert goes on to state that after just one look at the mutineers' pretend uniforms, he was convinced. After a brief standoff, the fight was over. The mutineers surrendered. The nightmare was over.
Thank God.
It is at this point in my movie, which I have now decided to produce, that I see the camera flying overhead of the defeated mutineers, surveying the water, the shore, the beach, making its way inward until it slows and finally stops just above that limestone pit. From there, the lens zooms in, and a small blur turns into a crumpled, naked, filthy shell of a man who takes the fetal position before screaming his final anguish of defeat.
Pure poetry.
Anyway, that's just me.
Please tell me there's some sort of an epilogue to this.
It's not as complete as I'd like. Many of the survivors were never heard from again. Following the climactic defeat of the mutineers, interrogations began right away. many of the mutineers readily confessed, giving full accounts of the killings, the cult, and the intended mutiny. And while no one claimed Geronimus was a murderer, all the confessions concluded that he was the cause of all the troubles. When Geronimus appeared before Pelsert, he was quite the sight. His pompous uniform in tatters, covered in bird feces and feathers, stinking of rotten meat and his own urine. The very picture of a fallen man. For his part, he claimed no involvement and said he had only ever acted in self-preservation, forced into his role as Captain General of the islands by others.
Wow, a true Braveheart.
Justice in the United Dutch provinces was very specific at this time. A man could only be convicted to death by his own confession, without the use of torture. However, they could absolutely be tortured both before and after said confession. Up first was Geronimus, and most deservedly so. It did not take much for this coward to crow. His goose was cooked, and he most definitely ratted out all his little friends, happily naming names and taking them all down with him. Now for the sentencing. Erica, would you do the honors?
I would be delighted to live out my fantasy as a judge. Geronimus first had his hands cut off with a hammer and chisel, and then went to the gallows to hang, the maximum penalty under Dutch law at the time, but that's not all. 4 of his elite mutineers received the same sentence. 3 mutineers received hanging, but got to keep their hands for the afterlife. 9 other mutineers were brought back to Java for further interrogation, but in the end, unsurprisingly, they were punished in transit, sentenced to keel hauling and or yard arming, both highly dangerous and a terrible way to go, plus 100 flogs. Oh, and all their wages were taken should they survive, which is not likely with the keel hauling, which is basically they tie them to the boat, but then throw them overboard to be drug. Finally, 2 men, including the fabulously named Waterloo, were marooned on a desert island, very appropriate for the man who had tried to take a ship and turn pirate.
Yeah, no one knows what became of them. I guess at some point there were some attempts to find them, or at least people returned to the island and had a look around, but no.
I'm not sad about that. So 19 men were freed, those who'd signed the oath but never participated in the bloodshed. And finally, the defenders' leader, Weeba Hayes, was promoted and his salary doubled.
Though he didn't survive long in the Indies once he arrived.
Are you serious?
I know. I'm sorry.
Not fair.
The 77 survivors finally arrived in Java 183 days after the wreck. We have very few records to indicate what happened to them.
I'm not thrilled with that outcome. I can't lie to you.
I know. Francisco Pelsert, we know, died within a year of illness.
This is not getting any better for the heroes.
I know. The captain, Jacobs, still faced trial for his planned mutiny, though he never confessed despite repeated torture, and he ultimately died in jail awaiting trial.
Okay, yeah, but what about the mistress? Because I'm invested.
I am not sure. She might have died in jail as well. It's unclear. We do know that she did make it to Java, though. Geronimus's wife survived losing her son, her husband, and her home. There are records which indicate that she lived a meager existence for a time, certainly long enough to hear of her husband's horrific crimes and his execution. But then she too disappears from the accounts.
Listen, her life seemed like a hot mess express, but at least she wasn't with him when all this went down. I really hope she started a life as someone new and had just a wonderful damn time.
Absolutely. I would love to think that she just changed her name and began again. Goodness knows she deserves it. Due to Pelsert's meticulous notes during the trials and the long list of confessions, we have a lot of facts about this case. While it cannot be for certain, here are the most accurate estimates of the carnage. 115 deaths, 96 men or boys, 12 women, and 7 young children. All these people, all of their stories might easily have been lost to time had not Weba and his men rowed just that much faster than the mutineers. It just goes to show, mere seconds make all the difference in history. Thank you for listening, and tune in next week to see what surprises we have in store. I'm Caroline.
I'm Erica.
And we are Pithily Yours. I want to say an enormous shout out to Mike Dash, who wrote Batavia's Graveyard, the true story of the mad heretic who led history's bloodiest mutiny. It was a wonderful read. I couldn't put it down, despite it being a nonfiction, dense book. From what I understand, Mr. Dash also did much of the research because a lot of these records were only ever in Dutch and never translated into English. And so again, thank you so much. You made it possible to make this episode.
This episode is brought to you by the Pithy Chronicle, LLC. The Pithy Chronicle is intended for education, entertainment, and non-commercial purposes. Any views or opinions expressed in this podcast are personal and do not represent those of people, institutions, or organizations that the owner may or may not be associated with in a professional or personal capacity. While we offer lots of sarcasm, this podcast does not offer any advice or services. Listening to this podcast may induce fits of laughter, unexpected distraction, or uncontrollable rage at the subjects, hopefully not at us. We hope you learned something today. If not, so sorry. Please be advised we are not experts in the following fields: medical, legal, financial, technological, thermonuclear engineering, submarine warfare, neuroscience, or cat husbandry. Thanks for listening to our little disclaimer. Just covering our history-loving asses. Bye!